I walked into my 10-year reunion to settle a score with the man who ruined my life. But I didn't expect the room to fall silent for an even more dangerous predator, or the moment my own dark secrets would be used to burn them both to the ground. The velvet curtains of the ballroom felt like a shroud, stifling and heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and desperate nostalgia. I smoothed the silk of my midnight blue dress, checking my reflection in the polished brass of the entry doors. 5 years. 5 years since I walked out of that penthouse with nothing but a carry-on suitcase and a shattered sense of self. My ex-husband, Victor, hadn't just taken my dignity. He had tried to scrub my existence from his high society life. I hadn't planned on coming to the 10-year class reunion. I had spent half a decade building a new identity, a new company, and a new life 3,000 miles away. But when the invite landed on my desk, I saw the name at the top of the guest list. The primary sponsor of the event, Viktor Volkov, CEO, mogul, and the man who told me I'd never be anything without his last name. I didn't come for the memories. I came for the closure. As I stepped into the room, the noise level dropped. Heads turned. It wasn't just the dress. It was the way I walked, with the poise of someone who had learned to command boardrooms instead of just kitchen staff. I saw him near the bar, swirling a glass of amber liquid, laughing at something a sycophant whispered into his ear. He looked exactly the same, yet entirely smaller than I remembered. When his eyes finally landed on me, the laughter died in his throat. He set his drink down with a deliberate, slow motion and began to weave through the crowd, cutting a path straight toward me. The old instinct to shrink, to apologize for taking up space, flared in my chest, but I crushed it. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze raking over me with that signature look of cold, predatory judgment. He didn't offer a hug or even a polite smile. Instead, he let out a sharp, dismissive snort, his lips curling into a condescending smirk that made my blood boil. "Look at you," he murmured, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I see you're still trying to play the part. But let's be honest, Elena. After all this time, is this really the best you could do for yourself? You couldn't find anyone better to show up with?" I hadn't brought a date. I didn't need one. But before I could answer, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a jagged whisper. "You're still just a footnote in my life, and frankly, you look like you're struggling to keep up with the status of this room." I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, the familiar sting of his humiliation. I was ready to deliver the biting retort I'd practiced in the mirror for weeks, but suddenly, the air in the room shifted. A heavy hush rippled through the guests behind me, and Victor's arrogant smirk faltered as he looked past my shoulder. His eyes widened, his face draining of color until he looked like a ghost. He took a staggering step backward, his hand trembling as he reached for the edge of a marble table to steady himself. "You," he breathed, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here?" I turned slowly to see who had silenced the room, and my heart hammered against my ribs when I saw the man standing behind me, looking at Victor with a gaze so cold it could freeze the Atlantic. The man behind me wasn't just a guest. He was a force of nature. Standing 6'3" in a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than my first car, Adrian Thorne looked like he belonged on the cover of a magazine, not a stuffy high school gym turned ballroom. His presence alone sucked the oxygen out of the room. He didn't acknowledge the gaping onlookers or the sea of confused faces. His eyes were locked entirely on Victor, and they were devoid of any warmth. Victor's hand was still gripping the table edge, his knuckles white. The CEO persona he wore like armor had cracked, revealing a frantic, unmoored man underneath. Adrian, Victor stammered, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. I wasn't informed you were the lead investor for this foundation. Nobody told me. Adrian didn't even glance at him. He stepped forward, his movements fluid and predatory, and placed a proprietary, gentle hand on the small of my back. The heat of his palm against my dress sent a jolt of electricity through me that I hadn't expected. He turned his head slightly, meeting my gaze with a softness that was light years away from the ice he was currently projecting toward my ex. "Is this the man, Elena?" he asked, his voice a low, smooth baritone that echoed in the sudden silence. "The one who wasted so much of your potential?" Victor's jaw dropped. He looked between us, his confusion quickly souring into a toxic cocktail of disbelief and fury. "Elena? You're with him? This is some kind of sick game, right? You found some actor to play the part of a billionaire to get back at me?" Victor let out a jagged, hysterical laugh, trying to reclaim his footing. "You don't know who this is, Elena. You're being played. He's a shark. He ruins companies for sport. He's probably using you to get to my private accounts." He stepped closer, attempting to regain his alpha status, his voice dripping with condescending pity. "Sweetheart, I'm trying to save you from a disaster. You're clearly in over your head with a man who doesn't know the first thing about loyalty." Adrian's expression didn't change, but the atmosphere in the room shifted from shock to something much more dangerous. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a slim, gold-embossed envelope. He didn't hand it to Victor. He tossed it onto the table, the sound of it hitting the polished wood ringing out like a gavel. "I don't play games, Victor," Adrian said, his tone terrifyingly level. "And I certainly don't play with the people who matter to me. It's funny you mention loyalty, because as of 48 hours ago, I didn't just buy the controlling shares of your parent company. I bought the debt your board has been trying to hide for the last 6 months." Victor turned a shade of sickly gray. That's impossible. My board hasn't even finalized the audit." "Your board is currently being led out of their offices by my legal team," Adrian replied, his eyes narrowing. "But that isn't the reason I'm here tonight." He turned back to me, ignoring Victor entirely, and brushed a strand of hair from my shoulder. The room was deathly quiet, every phone poised to capture the spectacle. "The merger we discussed, Elena," Adrian said, his voice dropping just enough to be intimate, yet perfectly audible to the crowd. "The board is ready to sign, provided you accept the partnership. But there's one more thing." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small black velvet box, snapping it open to reveal a diamond that seemed to catch every light in the room, casting a blinding reflection across Victor's face. "The world thinks I'm a shark, but I've been waiting for you to tell me if I'm the right man to stand by your side while you take everything he thinks he owns." Victor stepped forward, his eyes wild, his voice trembling with a desperate, pathetic rage. "Don't you dare," he hissed. "You have no idea what she's hiding. If she accepts that ring, she's signing her own death warrant. Eleanor, tell him the truth about the documents you stole before you left." My breath hitched. My heart stopped. I had kept that secret buried for 5 years, certain that no one, not even the man who seemed to know everything, had ever discovered the truth about what I'd really taken from Victor's safe the night I walked out. The room felt as if it had been vacuum sealed. The air was thin, vibrating with the collective gasp of 200 people who had come for cheap drinks and high school gossip, only to find themselves front row at a corporate execution. Victor's face was twisted into a mask of frantic desperation, his veneer of untouchable CEO arrogance finally shattered. He looked at me, his eyes darting wildly, searching for a tremor in my hands, a flicker of fear. He wanted me to crumble. He wanted me to be the weeping, submissive girl he'd left behind. Documents? Adrian's voice was like velvet over steel. He didn't even look at Victor. He remained focused on me, his thumb tracing a slow, grounding circle on the small of my back. Is that what he's worried about, Elena? The stolen documents? Victor let out a jagged, breathless laugh, his gaze flicking to the crowd, trying to regain his footing. Oh, don't look so innocent. She knows exactly what I'm talking about. The blueprints, the proprietary algorithms, the trade secrets that basically built my empire. She didn't just leave me, Adrian. She gutted me. She's a thief. If you're associating with her, you're laundering intellectual property. The murmurs in the room turned into a low, frantic roar. A few people pulled out their phones, the blue light of screens illuminating the shocked expressions of my former classmates. I felt a cold sweat break out across my neck, but I didn't pull away from Adrian. In fact, I leaned into him. Victor, I said, my voice steady, clearer and colder than I had ever dared to be in our marriage. Those documents weren't stolen. They were recovered. You built your empire on the back of my research, on the patents I drafted in my sleep while you were busy taking credit for them at gala dinners. Victor paled, his composure slipping further. That's a lie. You have no proof. Everything is under my trademark. Is it? Adrian asked. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The entire room hung on his every syllable. He turned his head slightly toward the entrance of the ballroom, and suddenly the heavy double doors swung open. A team of 4 men in sharp charcoal suits, not security, but legal counsel, walked in with the precision of a military unit. At their head was a woman I recognized from the morning news, Sarah Vane, the most feared litigator in the country. She carried a sleek, leather-bound folder, her expression one of utter professional indifference. The room fell into a silence so profound, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Victor's eyes tracked their progress with a dawning, visceral horror. He knew who they were. He knew exactly what that folder contained. Mr. Volkov, Sarah Vane said, her voice cutting through the space like a razor. I believe you've been expecting us, though perhaps not here, and certainly not tonight. She walked right past him, ignoring his frantic, stuttered attempts to interject, and stopped directly in front of me. She handed the folder to Adrian, who opened it, scanned a single page, and then offered it to me. Everything is in order, Adrian whispered to me, his eyes burning with a dark, intense pride. The patents were legally transferred to your shell company 2 hours ago. The board has already signed the resolution. As of this moment, Victor, you don't just have a debt problem. You have no company left. Victor's knees buckled. He grabbed a waiter's tray to stop himself from collapsing, his face a grotesque portrait of ruin. He looked at me, his eyes wide, pleading now, his voice a raspy shadow of its former self. Elena, please, you don't know what you're doing. If you take the company, the offshore accounts, the ones you kept on the encrypted drive, they'll be exposed. You'll go down with me. You'll lose everything. I felt Adrian's grip on my back tighten. He turned to me, his face unreadable, his eyes searching mine. "Elena?" he asked quietly, the air between us suddenly thick with unspoken warnings. What is he talking about? What drive? Before I could answer, a loud, sharp crash echoed through the hall as the ballroom doors were kicked wide open by the police, who pushed through the stunned crowd with handcuffs ready. The lead officer held a warrant in his hand, his eyes scanning the room, landing directly on me. "Elena Vance?" the officer barked, the sound cutting through the tension. "You're under arrest for the unauthorized transfer of classified assets." The weight of the handcuffs snapped shut around my wrists with a brutal, metallic finality. The sound seemed to amplify in the deathly quiet of the ballroom, a death knell for the fantasy I had been building for the last 10 minutes. Victor's face, which a moment ago had been contorted in defeat, shifted into a twisted, triumphant smirk. He stood up straight, smoothing his tuxedo jacket, his confidence bleeding back into his posture. "Well," Victor drawled, his voice oily with malicious glee, "it seems the reunion is ending exactly as I predicted. I told you, Elena, you were never meant to win. You were meant to be the cautionary tale." Adrian didn't react with the panic I expected. He didn't shout, he didn't fight the officers, and he didn't look at me with betrayal. He stood perfectly still, his eyes locked onto the lead detective, a man whose badge read Detective Miller. Adrian's jaw was set, his expression shifting from protective to something far more dangerous. He reached into his breast pocket, not for a weapon, but for a burner phone. "Detective," Adrian said, his voice dropping into a register that made the police officer instinctively pause. "I would check the origin of that warrant if I were you. And while you're at it, call your precinct commander. Ask him about the Starlight Initiative and exactly why he's currently receiving a very uncomfortable phone call from the Attorney General's office." The detective faltered, his hand hovering over his radio. "I'm just following orders, sir. We have a signed warrant from Judge Holloway." "Holloway?" Adrian let out a cold, sharp laugh that held no mirth. "Holloway was removed from the bench 40 minutes ago for taking bribes from shell companies linked to, oh, look at that, Viktor Volkov's private accounts." Victor's face drained of color. "That's a lie. You're bluffing." "Am I?" Adrian took a step toward the detective, his presence so overwhelming that the officer took an involuntary step back. "Elena isn't under arrest for a crime. She's under protection for being the primary whistleblower in a federal RICO case. If you touch her, you aren't just obstructing justice, you're ending your career." The room was in total chaos. My classmates were recording, whispering, and scurrying toward the exits as the reality of the scandal hit them. My head spun. I hadn't told Adrian about the Starlight Initiative. I hadn't told anyone. How did he know the name of the files I had encrypted on that drive? I looked at Adrian, my eyes wide, searching his face for a flicker of recognition. He leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear, his voice a whisper meant only for me. "I told you I was a shark, Elena. I didn't say I was one of your enemies." Victor, seeing his last card being played, lunged forward, his face purple with rage. "She's a liar. She's the one who funneled the money. She's the one who—" He never finished the sentence. A loud, rhythmic thudding of heavy boots hit the floorboards as a secondary group of men, These, in tactical black gear with federal agent emblazoned across their chests, swarmed the room, not for me, but for Victor. They bypassed us entirely, tackling him to the floor before he could even draw a breath to scream. As they dragged him, kicking and cursing, toward the exit, the lead agent paused in front of us. He looked at me, then at Adrian, and gave a sharp, professional nod. "The assets have been seized, Mr. Thorne. All of them, just as you requested." I stood there, trembling, the handcuffs still biting into my wrists, the air buzzing with the chaos of a collapsing empire. Adrian turned to me, the coldness in his eyes melting away as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver key. He didn't unlock the cuffs. He held the key up, dangling it between his fingers, his gaze intense and unreadable. "Now," Adrian whispered, his voice trembling with a sudden, dark intensity. "Since the show is over, Elena, why don't you tell me the part you haven't told anyone? Where is the real drive? The one with the names of the people who are actually holding the leash on this entire city?" My heart stopped. I had hidden that drive in the one place no one would ever look. But as I saw the look in Adrian's eyes, I realized with a sickening jolt that he hadn't just come here to save me. He had come here to retrieve the only leverage I had left, and he was willing to burn the entire room to the ground to get it. "You don't want to know," I whispered, backing away. He stepped closer, blocking my path, his shadow looming over me. "Oh, I think I do. Because if you don't tell me, Elena, you're not leaving this building, with or without those handcuffs." The ballroom, once a stage for vanity, was now a tomb of secrets. The shouting had faded into the low, rhythmic hum of tactical radios, and the scent of expensive perfume had been replaced by the sharp, sterile tang of ozone and fear. Adrian stood before me, his silhouette framed by the harsh floodlights of the agents swarming the room. He wasn't the knight in shining armor anymore. He was something far more ancient, a predator who had finally cornered his prize. "The drive, Elena," he repeated, his voice devoid of the warmth he'd shown earlier. "You were always the smartest person in any room we entered, but you were always too sentimental. You're holding on to the names of people who will erase you the moment they realize you're still breathing. Give it to me, and I can be your exit strategy." I looked at his outstretched hand, then down at the cuffs still binding my wrists. I realized then that my entire life had been a series of men trying to own me. Victor through ego and greed, and Adrian through power and calculated manipulation. They were two sides of the same counterfeit coin. I took a shaky breath, forcing the terror to subside into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. "You think you've played me, Adrian? You think you tracked my movements, bought my debt, and orchestrated this rescue just to be the one who owns the keys to the city?" He smiled, a thin, humorless line. "I don't think. I know." "You missed one thing," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You spent so much time tracking my digital footprints that you forgot to look at the physical ones." I reached into the hidden inner pocket of my clutch, the one my mother had taught me to sew when I was 12, and pulled out a small, unassuming plastic micro SD card. It wasn't the drive, it was a distraction, a decoy. I held it out between my fingers. "Is this what you want? The list of the shadow board? The offshore accounts of every senator and CEO in this building?" His eyes flashed with a hunger that confirmed every suspicion I'd had. He reached for it, his composure finally slipping just enough to show the desperation underneath. But as his fingers brushed the plastic, I snapped my wrist back. The real data, I whispered, is already halfway to the SEC and the public press. I didn't come here for closure, Adrian. I came here for a funeral, yours and Victor's. As if on cue, the giant projector screen at the front of the ballroom flickered to life. The static cleared, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of a private, encrypted conversation. It was Adrian's voice, discussing the systematic dismantling of his competitors, the bribery of judges, and the specific plan he had laid out to ruin me if I didn't hand over the data. The color drained from his face. The shark had been exposed in his own ocean. Outside, the wail of sirens grew deafening. Not just police, this was the sound of a federal raid. Not on me, not on Victor, but on the man who had thought himself the puppet master of us all. You didn't really think I'd come to a reunion without an insurance policy, did you? I stepped toward him, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. You wanted to own my potential, Adrian, but you underestimated my capacity for vengeance. He lunged for me, his face a mask of primal rage, but before he could close the distance, the tactical team pivoted. They moved with a speed that startled even me, pinning him to the floor. The same handcuffs that had bound me were transferred to his wrists, clicking home with a finality that made my heart soar. As they dragged him past me, he didn't scream or bargain. He just looked at me, his gaze flickering with a twisted sort of respect. You learned well, Elena, he rasped, his voice barely audible over the chaos. But you're alone now. You have no money, no title, and no one to protect you from the people on that list. I don't need a protector, I replied, smoothing my dress as I turned toward the heavy brass doors of the ballroom. I just needed a clean slate. I walked out of the hotel into the cool night air. The city lights stretched out before me, vast and indifferent. I had nothing left of my old life, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt like I was finally, truly free. I took the small, worthless piece of plastic from my pocket and tossed it into the gutter. The real files were already being uploaded. The empire was burning, and I walked away, not looking back at the ashes. The story wasn't about who won. It was about the moment I stopped being a character in someone else's narrative and finally started writing my own.